The Corvani war fleet moved through space like death itself. 12 massive ships floated in perfect formation, their silver hulls gleaming under distant starlight. Each vessel was over 2 miles long and armed with weapons that could burn planets to ash. The Corvani Empire had ruled the galaxy for 3,000 years, and their military might was the reason why. Admiral Zethkar stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Eternal Dominion. His reptilian features showed no emotion as he watched a small trade convoy try to escape from his fleet. The little ships were pathetic compared to Corvani warships. Their hulls were crude metal instead of bioengineered living tissue. Their weapons were simple projectiles instead of pure energy beams. "Destroy them slowly," Zethkar commanded in his cold voice. "Let them know the price of entering Corvani space without permission." Bright plasma beams reached out from the war fleet. The first merchant ship exploded in a ball of fire. The second ship tried to run, but another plasma blast tore through its engines. The third ship sent out distress calls in dozens of languages, begging for help that would never come. Zethkar smiled with sharp teeth. This was how the galaxy worked. The strong took what they wanted and the weak died. The Corvani were the strongest, so they ruled everything. It was simple and perfect. The trade ships were almost destroyed when something strange appeared on the fleet's sensors. A new ship was coming out of hyperspace, moving fast toward the battle. Zethkar looked at the readings with curiosity. The approaching vessel was big, maybe half the size of a Corvani battleship. But its design was unlike anything in the Imperial databases. "What is that thing?" asked Commander Vashitar, Zethkar's second-in-command. The Admiral studied the sensor data. The ship had a blocky, angular hull covered in thick armor plating. Strange weapons stuck out from every surface. Most odd of all, it seemed to be made from simple metal and ceramic instead of advanced biomaterials. "Some new species, perhaps," Zethkar said. "Scan their technology level." The readings came back quickly. The mysterious ship used primitive nuclear fusion for power. Its weapons were chemical explosives and kinetic projectiles. Its armor was just layers of metal and ceramic. By Corvani standards, it was barely more advanced than stone tools. "Should we destroy it, Admiral?" Vashtar asked. Zethkar thought for a moment. "No, capture it instead. I want to study these new aliens. They might make useful slaves." On the bridge of the UES Thunder, Captain Jake Morrison watched the Corvani fleet through his main view screen. He had never seen ships like these before. They moved with perfect coordination, like dancers performing an ancient routine. Their hulls seemed to flow and shift like living things, and their weapons had just destroyed 3 innocent merchant vessels with casual ease. "Captain," said his communications officer, Lieutenant Sam Turner, "I'm picking up distress signals from the convoy. One ship is still alive but badly damaged." Morrison's jaw tightened. The Thunder was one of Earth's newest battleships, sent to explore this region of space. They were supposed to be on a peaceful mission, making contact with new civilizations. Instead, they had found killers. "Chief Park," Morrison called to his chief engineer. "How are our systems?" Lisa Park checked her readings. "Fusion reactors are running hot but stable. Weapons are loaded and ready. But Captain, our experimental systems haven't been fully tested yet." "We'll have to make do," Morrison said. "Sam, try to communicate with those alien ships. Maybe we can avoid a fight." Turner worked at his station for several minutes before shaking his head. "They're not responding to any of our standard communication protocols, sir. But I am picking up their transmissions. Their language is complex, but the computer is starting to work it out." On the Corvani flagship, the alien vessel had come to a stop just outside weapons range. Zethkar found this amusing. Did these primitives think they could threaten the mighty Corvani Empire? "Admiral," reported his sensor officer, "the alien ship is scanning us with some kind of radar system. Very crude technology." "Let them look," Zethkar said. "They will see the futility of resistance. Signal the fleet to surround them. Use capture formation 7. The Corvani ships began to move, spreading out to encircle the human battleship. Each vessel took its assigned position with mechanical precision. This was a formation the Empire had used for centuries to capture enemy ships without destroying them. Morrison watched the alien fleet spread out around his ship. He didn't need his tactical officer to tell him what was happening. These things were trying to trap the Thunder like hunters surrounding a wild animal. "Captain," said Lieutenant Commander Alex Chen from the fighter bay, "my pilots are ready to launch. Just give the word." Morrison looked at his crew. They were all young, all eager, all ready to fight for what was right. That was the human way. When faced with bullies, you didn't back down. You hit back twice as hard. "All hands, this is the captain," Morrison announced over the ship's communication system. "We have encountered a hostile alien force that has just murdered innocent civilians. They seem to think we're easy prey. Let's show them how wrong they are." Across the thunder, the crew cheered and prepared for battle. In the engine room, Lisa Park pushed the fusion reactors beyond their safe limits. In the weapons bay, Chief Dan Rodriguez armed every missile and railgun the ship carried. In the fighter hangars, Alex Chen and his pilots climbed into their small, fast attack craft. Admiral Zethkar was puzzled when his sensors detected massive energy spikes from the alien ship. The primitive vessel was somehow increasing its power output to dangerous levels. No civilized species would risk their ship systems like that. "Admiral," his communications officer reported, "I've decoded some of their language. They're broadcasting on all frequencies. The message says, 'Come and take it.'" Zethkar had never heard that phrase before, but something about it made his cold blood run even colder. In 3,000 years, the Corvani had never met a species that welcomed battle. Every other race begged for mercy or tried to run away. None had ever issued challenges. "All ships prepare to engage," Zethkar ordered. "Use minimum force. I want prisoners, not corpses." The Corvani fleet opened fire first, sending streams of plasma energy toward the human battleship. The beams were carefully calibrated to disable, not destroy. They struck the Thunder's hull and exploded in bright flashes. Morrison felt his ship shudder under the impact. "Damage report." "Minor hull damage," on Chief Park reported. "Their weapons are powerful, but they're not trying to kill us yet." "Then let's not give them time to change their minds," Morrison said. "All weapons, fire at will." The Thunder's response shocked everyone who witnessed it. Instead of elegant energy beams, the human ship spat out solid projectiles moving at incredible speed. Railgun slugs tore through space faster than the eye could follow. Nuclear missiles streaked toward the Corvani ships like angry hornets. The first railgun slug hit a Corvani cruiser dead center. The projectile punched through the ship's energy shields like they weren't even there, then tore a hole completely through the vessel from bow to stern. The cruiser spun out of control, leaking atmosphere and crew into the void. Admiral Zethkar stared in disbelief. His perfect shields had failed completely against primitive kinetic weapons. How was that possible? The battle between the galaxy's old masters and its new challengers had begun. Admiral Zethkar watched his wounded cruiser drift helplessly through space. Green blood leaked from the massive hole in its hull, and the ship's biometal structure tried desperately to heal itself. But the damage was too severe. The vessel would need months of repair time if it survived at all. "Impossible," whispered Commander Vashitar. "No primitive weapon should penetrate our shields." But the evidence floated before them. The human projectile had passed through their most advanced defenses like they were made of paper. Worse still, the alien ship was launching more attacks. Dozens of missiles raced toward the Corvani fleet, each one tipped with nuclear warheads. "Point defense systems, engage," Zethkar commanded. Streams of plasma fire reached out from the Corvani ships, trying to destroy the incoming missiles. Most of the human weapons exploded safely in space, creating brilliant flashes of atomic fire. But several missiles got through the defense screen and struck their targets. The explosions were massive. Nuclear fire washed over Corvani hulls, overwhelming their energy shields and scorching their biometal armor. 2 more ships took heavy damage and fell out of formation. The perfect Corvani battle line was falling apart. On the Thunder's bridge, Captain Morrison watched the results of his first strike. The alien ships were tough, but they weren't invincible. Their shields seemed designed to stop energy weapons, not solid projectiles. That was a weakness he could exploit. "Alex, launch all fighters," Morrison ordered. Lieutenant Commander Chen had been waiting for those words. "Roger, Captain." "All squadrons, launch, launch, launch." The Thunder's fighter bays opened like hungry mouths. Small, fast ships poured out into space by the dozens. Each fighter carried a human pilot who had trained for years to fly in combat. They moved in loose formations that looked chaotic compared to Corvani precision, but somehow worked perfectly together. Chen led the first attack wave personally. His fighter was barely bigger than an ancient Earth jet, but it carried missiles and cannon that could damage much larger ships. Behind him, 23 other pilots followed in what looked like random patterns but was actually controlled chaos. Admiral Zethkar studied the approaching fighters with confusion. They didn't fly in proper formation. They didn't follow standard attack patterns. Some flew high, others low, A few even flew upside down compared to the rest. It made no tactical sense. "Sir," his tactical officer reported, "I cannot predict their attack routes. They seem to be improvising." That word sent a chill through Zethkar's hearts. Improvisation was the enemy of proper military doctrine. For 3,000 years, the Corvani had won battles through perfect planning and flawless execution. These humans seemed to make up their strategy as they went along. The fighters reached the Corvani fleet and attacked like a swarm of angry insects. They dodged between the large ships, using their size and speed to avoid the plasma beams trying to swat them down. Human pilots laughed and shouted over their communication channels as they fired missiles at point-blank range. Chen locked his targeting system onto a Corvani destroyer and fired 2 missiles. The alien ship tried to shoot them down, but the human pilot was already diving toward the vessel's hull, using the ship itself as cover from other defenders. "Take that, you ugly lizard," Chen yelled as his missiles punched through the destroyer's armor and exploded inside. The Corvani ship shuddered and began to list to one side. Its biometal hull tried to seal the wounds, but more human fighters were already attacking. They swarmed over the destroyer like predators bringing down wounded prey. Back on the Thunder, Chief Weapons Officer Dan Rodriguez was having the time of his life. His railguns fired continuously, sending solid slugs toward the alien fleet. Each shot moved so fast it was just a streak of light, but the damage they caused was very real. "Reloading tubes 3 and 4, Rodriguez reported cheerfully. "Target that big one in the center, Captain. I want to see if their flagship bleeds green too." Morrison nodded. "Make it count, Dan." The Thunder's main railgun swiveled toward the Eternal Dominion and fired. The massive slug crossed the distance between ships in seconds and struck the Corvani flagship's shields. This time, however, the shields held. The projectile bounced off and spun away into space. Admiral Zethkar felt his ship shake from the impact but smiled when his shields held firm. The flagship's defenses were much stronger than his smaller vessels. Perhaps these humans weren't so dangerous after all. Then the Thunder fired again, and again, and again. Each railgun slug hammered against the Eternal Dominion's shields like a giant fist. The energy barriers flickered and sparked under the constant bombardment. Warning lights flashed across the flagship's bridge as power systems strained to maintain the defense screen. "Shield strength down to 60%, reported the Corvani engineer. "If they keep firing, we will lose protection within minutes." Zethkar had never faced an enemy that could threaten his flagship. The Eternal Dominion was supposed to be invincible, but these humans weren't following the rules of civilized warfare. They concentrated all their fire on single targets instead of spreading it around. They attacked continuously instead of pausing to recharge their weapons. They fought like they actually wanted to destroy their enemies instead of just defeating them. On the Thunder, Lieutenant Karen Blake monitored the alien communication channels. As the ship's computer specialist, she was trying to understand how the enemy coordinated their attacks. What she found surprised her. "Captain," Blake reported, "the alien ships are having trouble adapting to our tactics. Their communications are full of requests for new orders and confusion about how to respond to our attacks." Morrison found that interesting. "Are you saying they can't think for themselves?" "It seems like they rely heavily on predetermined battle plans," Blake explained. "When we do something unexpected, they have to ask permission before changing their response." That was valuable information. Morrison realized he was fighting an enemy that was very good at following orders but bad at thinking creatively. Human military doctrine encouraged individual initiative and improvisation. Apparently, these aliens did the exact opposite. "All units, listen up," Morrison broadcast to his fighters and weapons crews. "The enemy can't handle surprises. So let's give them lots of surprises." The human attack intensified. Fighter pilots performed impossible maneuvers that should have killed them, but somehow worked perfectly. The Thunder's weapons fired in patterns that made no sense but caused maximum damage. Even the ship's movement seemed random and chaotic, making it hard for the aliens to target effectively. Admiral Zethkar watched his perfect battle formation collapse into confusion. 3 of his ships were heavily damaged or destroyed. His fighters couldn't match the wild flying of the human pilots. Even his flagship was in danger from the constant railgun bombardment. For the first time in his long military career, Zethkar considered the possibility that he might lose this battle. The thought terrified him more than death itself. The Corvani Empire had never been defeated by a single enemy ship. If word of this spread, it could destroy their reputation throughout the galaxy. All ships maximum firepower, Zethkar commanded. Destroy that vessel now! The remaining Corvani ships turned all their weapons toward the thunder. Plasma beams converged on the human battleship from multiple directions, creating a storm of energy that lit up space like a miniature sun. Captain Morrison felt his ship shake and heard alarms wailing throughout the hull. But the thunder kept fighting, its thick armor absorbing punishment that would have vaporized most other vessels. Damage report, Morrison called out. Hull breaches on decks 5 through 7, Chief Park reported. Lost 2 weapon turrets and the main sensor array. But we're still in the fight, Captain. Morrison smiled grimly. The aliens had shown their hand. They were powerful, but they weren't used to enemies who could take a beating and keep coming back for more. That was about to be their biggest mistake. Dan, target their flagship's bridge, Morrison ordered. Let's cut off the head of this snake. The Thunder's remaining weapons turned toward the Eternal Dominion, ready to end this battle once and for all. Admiral Zethkar's clawed hands gripped his command chair as the Thunder's weapons focused on his flagship. The human ship was badly damaged but still fighting with a fury that defied logic. Any civilized species would have retreated by now to repair their vessel and plan a more careful attack. But these humans seemed to think that taking damage made them more dangerous, not less. Sir, his communications officer reported with fear in his voice. I'm receiving a priority transmission from High Command. Zethkar activated the holographic display. The image of Grand Marshal Vektar appeared, his ancient reptilian features showing deep concern. Vektar had commanded the Corvani military for over 500 years and had never known defeat. Admiral, Vektar spoke in the formal language of the Empire. We have been monitoring your battle. What is the status of this new species? Zethkar felt shame burn in his chest. They are more capable than expected, Grand Marshal. Their weapons and tactics are unlike anything in our databases. Vektar studied the battle data streaming from the flagship. His cold eyes showed no emotion, but Zethkar knew the old commander was analyzing every detail. The Grand Marshal had built the modern Corvani Empire through careful planning and overwhelming force. He did not tolerate failure. These humans fight without proper formation, Vektar observed. They waste energy on excessive firepower instead of precise strikes. Yet somehow they are winning. Explain this. Zethkar had been wondering the same thing. Their tactics appear random, but they achieve results. They sacrifice efficiency for raw aggression, and their ship seems designed to absorb incredible amounts of damage. On the Thunder's bridge, Captain Morrison watched another Corvani vessel fall out of formation. The alien ship was streaming atmosphere and debris, its biometal hull cracked open like a broken egg. His railguns had found another weakness in their defenses. Captain, Chief Engineer Lisa Park called from her station. I'm reading massive energy buildup from the enemy flagship. They're charging something big. Morrison studied his tactical display. The largest alien ship was indeed gathering power, but not in its weapons. Strange energy patterns swirled around the vessel's hull, creating distortions in space itself. What are they doing, Karen? Morrison asked his computer specialist. Lieutenant Blake analyzed the sensor readings with growing alarm. Sir, I think they're deploying some kind of gravity weapon. The energy signature is unlike anything I've ever seen. Morrison had read about theoretical gravity weapons in the Academy. If they existed, such devices could crush a ship from the inside out by manipulating the fundamental forces of space-time. No armor or shields could protect against that kind of attack. All hands brace for impact, Morrison announced over the ship's communication system. Unknown weapon incoming. Grand Marshal Vektar watched the battle from his command center deep within Corvani space. The gravity disruptor was the Empire's most advanced weapon. Developed over centuries of research into the basic forces of the universe, it had never failed to destroy any target, regardless of size or defenses. The weapon is charging, Vektar announced to his staff. These humans will soon learn why the Corvani Empire rules the galaxy. On the Eternal Dominion, Admiral Zethkar felt a moment of satisfaction. The gravity disruptor would end this embarrassing battle quickly. The human ship would be crushed into a ball of twisted metal, and his reputation would be saved. The weapon fired. Space itself seemed to bend and twist around the thunder. Invisible forces grabbed the human battleship and began to squeeze. Morrison felt the deck plates buckle under his feet as the ship's hull started to compress. Lights flickered and sparks flew from control panels as electrical systems failed under the impossible stress. Hull integrity failing. Park shouted over the sound of groaning metal. "We're losing structural cohesion throughout the ship." But something strange happened. The Thunder didn't collapse like every other ship that had faced the gravity disruptor. Instead, it bent and twisted but held together. Emergency systems activated throughout the vessel, and backup power flowed to critical areas. Lieutenant Commander Chen felt his fighter shake as the gravity waves passed through space. Several of his pilots lost control temporarily, but their small ships were too far away to be seriously affected. Chen watched in amazement as the Thunder survived what should have been certain death. "How are they still alive?" Chen whispered to himself. The answer lay in human engineering philosophy. While other species built elegant ships that worked perfectly under normal conditions, humans designed their vessels to function in the worst possible circumstances. Earth's history of constant warfare had taught them to build things that could take punishment and keep working. The Thunder's hull was made of overlapping layers of different materials, each designed to handle specific types of stress. When the gravity weapon twisted the ship's structure, the hull bent instead of breaking. Emergency supports activated automatically, strengthening weak points before they could fail completely. "Damage report," Morrison called out as the gravity attack finally ended. "We're hurt bad," Park admitted. "But we're still in one piece. Main power is down to 40% and we've lost 6 weapon turrets. But the engines are still working and most of our weapons are functional." Morrison could barely believe it. They had survived a weapon that should have killed them instantly. But he knew they couldn't take another attack like that. They needed to end this battle quickly. "Dan, can you target their weapon platform?" Chief Rodriguez checked his systems. "I've got a partial lock on the source of that gravity beam. It's heavily shielded, but I might be able to punch through with a concentrated barrage." "Do it," Morrison ordered. "All remaining weapons, fire everything we have." The Thunder's response surprised everyone who witnessed it. Instead of retreating to safety after taking massive damage, the human ship attacked with even greater fury. Every working railgun fired simultaneously, sending a stream of solid projectiles toward the Corvani flagship. Admiral Zethkar watched in disbelief as the human vessel charged straight at his ship. The gravity disruptor should have crushed them completely. Yet somehow they had survived and were now fighting back with desperate courage. The first railgun slug struck the Eternal Dominion's shields and bounced off harmlessly. But more projectiles followed, and then more. The constant bombardment began to overwhelm the flagship's defenses. Shield generators overloaded and failed one by one under the relentless assault. "Shield failure imminent," the Corvani engineer reported with panic in his voice. That was when Lieutenant Commander Chen made his move. The human fighter pilot had been watching the battle from a distance, waiting for the right moment to strike. When he saw the flagship's shields flickering, he dove toward the massive ship at maximum speed. "This is crazy," Chen muttered to himself as he activated his fighter's boarding pod. But crazy seems to work against these guys. Chen's fighter struck the Eternal Dominion's hull and buried itself deep in the biometal armor. Emergency systems sealed the breach automatically, but not before Chen's boarding pod had penetrated into the ship's interior corridors. The pod opened with explosive force, and Chen stepped out in full combat armor. He carried weapons designed for close-quarters fighting in the narrow spaces of damaged ships. The Corvani had never faced human marines in hand-to-hand combat. They were about to learn a painful lesson. Chen moved through the alien corridors like a hunter stalking prey. The Corvani ship's interior was designed for their reptilian physiology, with low lighting and warm, humid air. But Chen's armor compensated for the environmental differences. He encountered his first Corvani guards near the weapon control center. The aliens were tall and graceful, with natural armor plating and sharp claws. They carried energy weapons that could burn through most materials, but they had never fought a human marine. Chen moved with brutal efficiency, using his smaller size and superior agility to avoid their energy beams. His weapons were designed for maximum damage at close range. The fight was brief and decisive. Minutes later, explosions rocked the Eternal Dominion as Chen destroyed the gravity weapon from within. Admiral Zethkar felt his flagship shudder as its most powerful weapon was reduced to scrap metal. "The gravity disruptor is offline," his engineer reported with despair. "Internal damage is severe." Zethkar realized that these humans didn't just fight differently than other species. They were willing to sacrifice themselves to achieve victory. No Corvani warrior would have attempted such a desperate boarding action against overwhelming odds. For the first time in 3,000 years, a Corvani admiral began to understand what it meant to face an enemy that truly loved war. Lieutenant Commander Chen moved through the Corvani flagship like a force of nature. Behind him, explosions marked the destruction of the gravity weapon that should have killed the Thunder. But Chen wasn't finished. His mission was to cause as much damage as possible before the aliens could stop him. The Corvani crew had never dealt with an enemy inside their own ship. Their training focused on ship-to-ship combat and planetary invasions, not fighting in their own corridors. Chen used this confusion to his advantage, striking key systems and disappearing before guards could respond. Admiral Zethkar watched security reports flood his command screens. The single human warrior was causing chaos throughout his flagship. Power systems failed, weapon batteries went offline, and communication networks crashed as Chen worked his way through the ship's vital areas. How can one primitive alien cause so much damage? Commander Vashatar asked in frustration. Zethkar had no answer. Human technology was supposed to be inferior to Corvani science, yet this single enemy was crippling his most advanced warship from within. On the Thunder's bridge, Captain Morrison felt his damaged ship shudder as more systems failed. Chief Park worked frantically to keep critical systems online, but the gravity weapon had caused damage throughout the vessel. They were running out of time. Captain, Lieutenant Blake reported, I'm detecting massive hyperspace signatures approaching this location. Multiple ships incoming. Morrison's heart sank. If enemy reinforcements arrived now, the Thunder wouldn't survive another major engagement. But then he looked at the sensor readings more carefully and smiled. Sam, open a channel to the incoming ships, Morrison ordered. Channel open. Sir, Turner replied. This is Captain Morrison of the UES Thunder, Morrison broadcast. We are engaged with hostile alien forces. Request immediate assistance. The reply came back instantly in a familiar voice. Thunder, this is Admiral Jackson on the UES Defiance. Hold your position. The cavalry is coming. Space around the battle zone began to tear open as ship after ship dropped out of hyperspace. The human response fleet was massive. 20 battleships, 40 cruisers, and over 100 support vessels. Each ship bore the aggressive lines and heavy armament that marked Earth's military philosophy. Admiral Zethkar stared at the approaching human fleet with growing terror. He had thought the Thunder was alone, but instead he was facing an entire battle group. And unlike Corvani fleets that moved in perfect formation, the human ships spread out in what looked like chaos but somehow provided mutual support. Sir, his communications officer reported with a trembling voice, the human fleet is broadcasting on all frequencies. Put it on the main screen, Zethkar ordered. Fleet Admiral Paul Jackson appeared in the holographic display. He was an older human with gray hair and cold eyes that had seen too many battles. Behind him, the bridge of the Defiance bustled with activity as crew members prepared for combat. Attention, alien vessels. Jackson spoke in a calm, deadly voice. You have attacked human ships and killed innocent civilians. Surrender immediately, or we will destroy every one of your vessels. Zethkar activated his own communication system. I am Admiral Zethkar of the Corvani Empire. You have entered our space illegally. Withdraw immediately or face the consequences. Jackson studied the reptilian alien for a moment before laughing. Your space? According to our navigation charts, this is neutral territory. And frankly, after what you did to those merchant ships, I don't much care whose space it is. The human admiral paused and looked directly at Zethkar through the communication link. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to order your ships to stand down and prepare to be boarded. My people will take you back to Earth for trial. If you refuse, my fleet will demonstrate why humans are called the most dangerous species in known space. Zethkar felt his cold blood freeze. No one had ever spoken to a Corvani admiral with such casual disrespect. The Empire's reputation alone should have been enough to make these humans back down. Instead, they seemed eager for battle. You are outnumbered, Zethkar pointed out. My reinforcements will arrive soon. Jackson smiled without humor. Admiral, you've got 8 functional ships left. I've got over 160. Unless your reinforcements include the entire Corvani Navy, I like my odds. On the Thunder, Morrison watched the standoff between the two fleet commanders with interest. Admiral Jackson was known throughout the human fleet for his aggressive tactics and unwillingness to compromise. The aliens had just made the mistake of threatening him. All ships' battle stations, Jackson broadcast to his fleet. If they want to fight, we'll give them one they'll never forget. The human fleet began to spread out for attack formation. Unlike the rigid patterns favored by the Corvani, the human ships moved in loose groups that supported each other while maintaining flexibility. It was the difference between a parade and a pack of wolves. Admiral Zethkar realized he was facing a decision that would determine the fate of his entire fleet. He could fight and likely die, or surrender and face shame that would destroy his reputation forever. Neither option was acceptable to a Corvani commander. All ships, Zethkar transmitted to his remaining vessels, prepare for emergency hyperspace jump. We withdraw to regroup and plan a proper assault. But as his ships began to charge their hyperspace drives, Lieutenant Commander Chen struck again. Deep inside the Eternal Dominion, the human marine had reached the ship's main power core. Using explosives from his boarding pod, Chen destroyed the primary energy conduits that powered the flagship's faster-than-light systems. The Eternal Dominion shuddered as power failures cascaded through its systems. Without main power, the ship couldn't jump to hyperspace. It was trapped in normal space with an entire human battle fleet bearing down on it. Hyperspace drive is offline, the Corvani engineer reported with panic. We cannot escape. Zethkar felt despair wash over him. In a few short hours, his perfect fleet had been reduced to a handful of crippled ships. The humans had outfought them, outthought them, and now surrounded them completely. Sir, Commander Vashitar said quietly, perhaps we should consider surrender. The word hit Zethkar like a physical blow. No Corvani admiral had ever surrendered in battle. It went against everything their military culture represented. But the alternative was the complete destruction of his command. Admiral Jackson's voice came over the communication channel again. Admiral Zethkar, you have 30 seconds to surrender before my fleet opens fire. I suggest you use that time wisely. Around the Corvani ships, human vessels moved into attack positions. Their weapons were already trained on vital targets, and their crews waited eagerly for the order to fire. Morrison watched from the thunder as his fellow humans prepared to finish what he had started. 20 seconds, Jackson announced calmly. Zethkar looked around his bridge at the faces of his crew. They were all waiting for his decision, knowing that their lives depended on his next words. He thought about 3,000 years of Corvani military tradition and the shame of being the first admiral to surrender. Then he thought about the human warrior who had single-handedly crippled his flagship. He thought about the thunder taking damage that should have destroyed any ship and continuing to fight. He thought about how these humans seemed to treat war not as a duty or necessity, but as something they actually enjoyed. 10 seconds, Jackson said. Admiral Zethkar reached for his communication controls. The decision he made would echo throughout the galaxy for generations to come. The Corvani Empire was about to learn that they were no longer the masters of war. That title now belonged to humanity, and humans played the game by very different rules. Admiral Zethkar's clawed hand hovered over his communication controls as Admiral Jackson's countdown reached 0. Around his crippled flagship, over 160 human warships waited with weapons hot and crews eager for battle. The Corvani admiral had never faced such overwhelming odds. Time's up, Jackson announced coldly. All ships open fire. The human fleet erupted in coordinated violence. Railgun slugs and missiles streaked toward the remaining Corvani vessels from every direction. The aliens tried to return fire, but their weapons were designed for precision strikes against single targets. Against a swarm of attacking ships, their careful plasma beams seemed almost useless. Zethkar watched his remaining vessels disappear one by one under the human assault. The destroyer Voidhunter exploded in a ball of nuclear fire as missile after missile overwhelmed its defenses. The cruiser Starrender tried to ram a human battleship, but was cut to pieces by concentrated railgun fire before it could close the distance. Sir, Commander Vashitar shouted over the sound of alarms. We must surrender. The fleet is being destroyed. But Zethkar had moved beyond rational thought. 3,000 years of military tradition demanded that he fight to the death rather than submit to inferior aliens. Even as his flagship shook under human weapons fire, the admiral refused to give the order to stand down. On the Bridge of the Thunder, Captain Morrison watched the one-sided battle with mixed feelings. Part of him felt sorry for the aliens who were dying, but then he remembered the innocent merchant crews they had murdered. These Corvani had earned everything they were getting. Captain, Lieutenant Blake reported, I'm detecting new hyperspace signatures. More ships are approaching. Morrison's heart sank. If Corvani reinforcements arrived now, The battle could turn against the human fleet. But then he saw the sensor readings and realized the truth. The approaching ships were broadcasting human identification codes. "Sir," Sam Turner announced with excitement, "it's the Second Fleet. Admiral Carter is requesting permission to join the engagement." Morrison smiled as even more human warships dropped out of hyperspace. Word of the battle had obviously spread throughout human space, and every available ship was racing to join the fight. That was the human way. When one of their own was threatened, they all came running. Fleet Admiral Jackson watched his tactical display as the newcomers took positions around the battle zone. The Second Fleet added another 80 ships to his force, bringing the total human presence to over 240 vessels. Against 8 crippled Corvani ships, it was massive overkill. But Jackson wasn't interested in a fair fight. He was interested in sending a message that would echo throughout the galaxy for centuries to come. "All ships, concentrate fire on the flagship," Jackson ordered. "I want that admiral alive, but I want his ship crippled beyond repair." The combined human fleet turned its attention to the Eternal Dominion. Hundreds of weapons fired simultaneously, creating a storm of metal and energy that lit up space like a miniature star. The Corvani flagship's biometal hull began to crack and bleed as railgun slugs punched through its armor. Deep inside the dying ship, Lieutenant Commander Chen continued his one-man war against the alien crew. He had destroyed most of the ship's critical systems and was now working his way toward the bridge. Corvani guards tried to stop him, but their energy weapons were designed for ship-to-ship combat, not fighting in cramped corridors against a human marine. Chen reached the command deck just as Admiral Zethkar was preparing to activate his ship's self-destruct system. The Corvani admiral would rather die than surrender, taking his crew and the human warrior with him. "I don't think so, Lizard Boy," Chen said as he shot the self-destruct controls with his sidearm. Zethkar turned to face the human who had single-handedly destroyed his ship. Chen stood in the doorway wearing battle armor scorched by energy weapons and stained with alien blood. His helmet was cracked and his left arm hung useless at his side. But his weapon was steady and pointed directly at the admiral's head. "Surrender," Chen said simply. "Your war is over." For a moment, the two warriors stared at each other across the bridge. Zethkar saw death in the human's eyes, not the cold calculation of a professional soldier, but the hot fury of someone who actually enjoyed combat. It was then that the Corvani admiral finally understood what his empire had encountered. Humans weren't just another spacefaring species. They were predators who had turned warfare into an art form. They didn't fight because they had to. They fought because they wanted to. And that made them more dangerous than any weapon the Corvani had ever faced. "I surrender," Zethkar said quietly. The words felt like poison in his mouth, but he had no choice. His ship was dying, his fleet was destroyed, and the human warrior in front of him was clearly willing to kill him without hesitation. Chen activated his communication system. "Admiral Jackson, this is Chen. I have the enemy commander in custody." "The flagship is secure," Jackson's voice came back immediately. "Outstanding work, Commander. All ships cease fire. The battle is over." Across the battle zone, human weapons fell silent. The engagement had lasted less than 6 hours, but in that time the Corvani Empire's reputation for invincibility had been shattered forever. News of the defeat would spread throughout the galaxy within days. 6 months later, Admiral Zethkar sat in a comfortable cell on Earth, studying human military history. He had been stripped of rank and dishonored by his own empire, but the humans had treated him with surprising respect. They seemed to understand that he was a professional soldier who had simply been outmatched. Captain Morrison, now promoted to admiral, visited occasionally to discuss tactics and strategy. Zethkar found these conversations fascinating and disturbing. The humans had developed their military philosophy through thousands of years of constant warfare against their own species. They had literally evolved to be perfect warriors. "The thing you have to understand," Morrison explained during one visit, "is that humans don't see war as a last resort. We see it as a natural part of existence. Other species fight when they have to. We fight because we're good at it." Zethkar nodded slowly. "Your species is unique in the galaxy. Most civilizations develop beyond their violent impulses as they advance technologically." "Maybe," Morrison agreed, "but that also makes them weak. They forget that sometimes violence really is the answer to a problem. We never forgot that lesson." The former admiral looked out his window at the human city below. Earth was a beautiful world, but Zethkar could see the scars of ancient wars everywhere. Humanity had been forged in the fires of endless conflict, and it showed in everything they built. "What will happen now?" Zethkar asked. "Will your people conquer the galaxy?" Morrison smiled. "We're not conquerors, Admiral. We're protectors, but we're also very good at convincing people that they want our protection." As if to prove his point, news reports that day showed delegations from dozens of worlds requesting human military assistance. The galaxy had seen what Earth's warriors could do, and everyone wanted them as allies rather than enemies. The Thunder had been repaired and upgraded, becoming the flagship of humanity's first deep space exploration fleet. Its crew wore their battle scars with pride, knowing they had been the first humans to face an alien military power and emerge victorious. Lieutenant Commander Chen, now bearing the rank of commander, led the Marine detachment aboard the rebuilt Thunder. His boarding action against the Corvani flagship had become legendary throughout human space. Young Marines studied his tactics and dreamed of matching his achievements. Chief Engineer Lisa Park had been promoted to run the entire human fleet's engineering division. Her modifications to the Thunder's systems during the battle had kept the ship fighting when it should have been destroyed. Now every human warship carried her innovations, but perhaps the most significant change was in how the galaxy viewed humanity. Before the battle, humans had been unknown primitives from a distant world. Now they were recognized as the most dangerous military force in known space. The Corvani Empire signed a non-aggression pact with Earth within weeks of Zethkar's defeat. Other major powers followed suit, all eager to avoid testing human military capabilities. Trade agreements and diplomatic treaties flowed in as the galaxy's civilization sought to win humanity's friendship. Admiral Jackson, now in command of all human space forces, established military bases throughout the galaxy. Each base was staffed by volunteers who were eager to serve far from home. For humans, the chance to fight alien threats was an opportunity, not a hardship. Years later, historians would mark the battle between the Thunder and the Corvani fleet as the moment when humanity announced its arrival on the galactic stage. But for the humans who fought that day, it was just the beginning of their greatest adventure. The galaxy had new masters of war, and they were having the time of their lives. In the depths of space, human ships continued their patrols, their crews always ready for the next challenge. They carried names like Retribution, Vengeance, and Hell's Fury, names that struck fear into the hearts of pirates and tyrants throughout the galaxy. And somewhere, in the darkness between the stars, other threats waited to test humanity's resolve. But the humans weren't worried. They had